So marketing ops, I really am positioning that with my team as we kind of joke, we call it the reporting Sherpas, right? Because in today's world, we've got so many now systems of record, what we call them, at SAP. And, we started with just your old fashioned CRM systems. And then as a marketing organization, you add on your marketing automation platform of choice. And then that gets you going for a while, for sure. And it can go a long ways. And then you start to know, you look at what Scott Brinker's, all the technology from the last however many 5-10 years, you went from, you started it with maybe 300. I think you could barely fit it on that one page of over 5,000. So there are so many now niche players and niche in a good way, right? Because there's so much now data available to a marketer. And certainly over the last year with the pandemic, I'm in the enterprise space, but if you're, B2B or B2C, at least for us, our relationships are going more digital, right? There, you don't have the opportunity to meet with anyone and be heavily relationship engaged, at least the traditional relationships where they were in person or big events or, hey, here's a ticket to the Super Bowl, take your pick, whatever it may be. It's got to be a lot more digital. It's social selling as it goes. So you're just adding and layering on platform after platform. And you've really got to understand how each of those data platforms complement one another. You don't want them to contradict one another, right? Because, single source of the truth is hard enough when you only have one platform, let alone multiple platforms. So I think data-driven marketing is really where we've got to go. Budgets are shrinking, headcounts are shrinking, but expectations are rising. You can only, get smarter. And I think enabling digital platforms and collecting and harvesting that data, turning that into insights. And that's where I position our team at SAP from a marketing operations. That's where we can bridge the gap between really just the truly in the weeds, data geeks with all the love and intention of what that is to the business. And you've got to be able to talk, the same language and conversation. I think data is really going to be driving the efficiencies within marketing now.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, we hear it all the time on the podcast and on the show. Everyone's being more data driven. Everyone's focusing on adopting these technologies now that enable us to really measure things more accurately. I know you were just talking about getting out of a meeting when talking about key KPIs, right?
Yeah.
Across the org. I'm sure the amount of data that you guys see and that you're actually looking at and harvesting from your different platforms must be immense.
It is, and it's you. I many times like to use pendulum analogy. Depending on the time of year or the year, everything goes in cycles. You either swing from one extreme to the other. And the more data sources you get, it can definitely pull you in the extreme of too many metrics to measure. It's also just because I can doesn't mean I should, And so the call we just came out of is really talking through what is being cascaded down from our leadership. Obviously, everything should tie up to whatever your, 3 to 4 really key strategic performance indicators are. But also ask the question you just highlighted, does that metric drive the right behavior? It may look like a great metric to measure, but then let's talk through, okay, well, how does one attain that metric, whatever that target is? And then you talk that through and say, okay, now the behavior I just did to get that number, is that really what I want to be doing? So maybe that's not the right metric. It looked like it was, but maybe it's not. So it's for sure, you can now have, too many. Although I'll talk to the other side of that sword is what's the nice thing that we're seeing by having now new sources of data is now I can measure areas that got ignored before. You look at things at top of the funnel, and many times if you're in an organization where, the last touch gets the credit before it creates the lead, before it's an opportunity, well, those poor guys that are doing digital, and feeding the top of the funnel without, you wouldn't have the lower funnel. All of a sudden, their work is almost getting blown over because, hey, I wasn't the tele guy who called or whatever that last touch is. Now that I've got data sources and platforms that I can track and they can say, hey, here's what I contributed, whether it's multi-touch attribution, first touch attribution, take your pick, what works for you. That's the beauty also that I see with having these new platforms that you can standardize on, pick the right metric that measures truly the work that you do and show how that ties in to then the whole, stream of top of funnel through bottom of funnel through sales funnel. Well, I tell you, for us, and sometimes we joke. I'll share this with amongst us, just friends here on the session. Is we suffer sometimes from the cobbler's children, right? If you don't know that adage, right? Cobblers, who used to make shoes, a lot of times their kids didn't have the best shoes. We've got some unbelievable technology for our customers, right? Sometimes we weren't at the cutting edge internally, right? And that's changed over the last 5 or 6 years, thankfully. But some of the latest edge stuff that we've just gotten into in the last couple of years, for us, maybe it's not new for other folks out there, but we're loving intent data and technographic data, especially in our space. Again, as I mentioned, take the context where I'm coming from. As an enterprise software provider, it was very relationship driven, and it was very Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 driven, right? That was kind of, your father's Oldsmobile kind of a thing, or Cadillac. That was the old days, right? So you kind of didn't need a lot of intelligence. You weren't the hunter and gatherer, right? You were just kind of, shooting fish in a barrel, as it were. I'm being very stereotypical, but now in today's day and age, as we're pushing, we joke with, there's only 1,000 Fortune 1000 companies, right?
Yeah.
You've got to go downstream, right? And now more lines of business are controlling budgets, and you can purchase things from a cloud perspective. So you are going into the line of business. Every decision isn't the CIO anymore, right? You can be a line of business head, whether it's HR or supply chain or what have you, own your own budget and purchase your own software. So you've got to get smarter when those line of business heads are researching out there, intent data, so we are in a contract, and we work with a company called Bompora that provides intent data. And so that's one of the latest and greatest things for us, is to understand, what are people looking for? And so, you set it up where, you identify, you have to go through the due diligence to say, what's the terminology that's important to you, the terms that people would search for, and even specific companies that are maybe like your key accounts or whatever, your listeners and viewers may call them. You marry those two things together. So I've got now my key accounts, I've got my key terms, now contract with a company that does digital listening. So who's popping up in that radar? Because if you picture it on a radar, if you're sweeping the entire ocean, you're never going to find the gold, as it were. If you've got the ability to now narrow your field of vision, we do that through digital listening and the terms that we have in the companies. Now we can say, hey, one of our companies just popped up on a flag. Then we go through marry that with some technographic data, then our own first party data, marry those things together. And quite frankly, the other big data element, in all honesty, it's an old adage of marketing and sales working closer together than engagement, just asking them for their prioritization of lists. Marketing, don't think we know everything. From a sales perspective, tell me your top lists, and let us help you get smarter digitally and with the digital listening for those accounts. So those are the areas that are pretty cool that I'm excited about. So the intent data and who's surging and how does that tell us, the right time at the right place. Those are the things that really help you zone in on your segmentation. Traditionally, and like many of, again, your viewers out there would probably be at as well, is you have your traditional segmentation tools, right? Whether that's within your marketing automation platform or your Salesforce automation platform, whatever you're leveraging. And maybe some of you, maybe it's just, listen, I've got a SQL database and I'm just loading everything in there, and whatever, no judgment here. It's, you use what you got to use, right? I think, you go from your traditional, just basic attributes of, if I'm an HR marketer, selling an HR product suite, obviously someone who's in the HR line of business. So line of business is key, right? That's easy enough. And potentially even titles. Then you start to look at titles, obviously your CHRO, your chief HR operating officer, but all the other titles, you may be chief of like talent management or learning and development. So you've got all that. And hopefully that's, your own first party information, but that's just almost the equivalent of cold calling, quite frankly, and that's where you're at. It says, I think, you're using those attributes as a proxy to say, you're probably going to be interested in what I'm about to market to you, but it's still interruption marketing at that point in time. So then hopefully, and we touched about it just a little bit earlier with intent data, now looking at those listening signals out there. So now it's, well, who's popping up on the radar? So it's certainly not rocket science, but if someone is interested in something, then they're more likely to respond if you market to them, right? So and be, retail folks do this all the time, right? Every time you hit, the Starbucks site, to check out the latest latte, what's your banner ad in Facebook going to be? It's the next one. You've got that, coming up all the time and following you. Same in the B2B space, really. It's those digital listening. And what we've been able to do is once we take that data, we bring it into our data, like the intent data I'm talking about, and also some platform information we can marry to that as well, that we may not necessarily have if it's a net new account. We bring that into a data lake, we get all of it normalized and make sure all data privacy laws, whether it's California, CCPA, or GDPR, we're a global and a European company. So, we have to also be mindful of GDPR. Once you get all that available, now we actually, for our B2B marketers, to your question, we can make those data elements available as attributes when they do segmentation. So not only in that example, that HR marketer can say, hey, give me everyone who's maybe it's in the Northeast or South part of the United States or in a particular industry, and everyone who's got, a title or a department that looks like HR, but also say, and has been surging over the last 60 days on these 4 keywords that are HR related. So not only do you get someone who probably fits your profile, but also has an interest, right? And so it's just trying to make it almost that simple to say, not only do you take who looks like your traditional persona, but then we've got the timing right and we've got their interest right. Marry those 3 things, and that's kind of the direction we've been going over the last couple of years.
Yeah, right person seems like obviously identifying the right person, the right account, but the critical in terms of the right time is such a big trigger.
Yeah, and even to add to that too, where we found it a nice surprising benefit. I shouldn't say surprising because it's not a surprise when you see the data, but you just didn't think about it when you went into it. It's all those marketers that were going in, as example, when they would go in for HR roles, lines of business. And if I didn't do any of the listening, or I did only the listening, I may have missed all of the people that had analytics titles that are looking at like learning programs that are looking to buy HR stuff, but I didn't find you because I didn't think that you had either analytics roles or you had a specific role in IT, right? I was only focused on your line of business or department. So what the listening does is it almost says, hey, it doesn't matter who you are, because truly it doesn't matter. If I'm interested in fill in the blank, whatever your topic is, it doesn't matter who that is. So it's really helped us build out those buying centers. It's people that we traditionally, through our own maybe filters to the detriment of us, excluded people that were actually involved in that buying decision. But now that we open it up to these new data platforms, as I mentioned, of the digital listening, we can actually get those folks in. So that has been a nice byproduct. So the ones that you talked about, so ideally the ones you own, that you should know. So of your, just from the basics, and hopefully everyone nods their head on this one, for sure, one of the first things is just industry, right? If I know nothing about you, and if you come in, if you're a net new name, and it is important for any industry and any field, if you're gathering net new folks, you're not posting up a form of 50 fields to get all those things, right? You try and make it as frictionless, right, as possible for them to consume your content or whatever you were trying to attract them to. At a minimum, we put up at least industry, because even if I don't know your level, your title, your line of business, if I know you're in aerospace and defense or regulated industries or consumer products, then I can at least slot you into the right nurture campaign. And then you can do, if you do progressive profiling, the next couple of touches, then I'll get your title, then I'll get your line of business, what have you. So industry is certainly key. Other area as a must-have, and if you're in an enterprise, so I'll speak from that angle as we are, is your own kind of your first-party data for your own website traffic. We've gone through a handful of acquisitions over the last couple of years, and every one of those standalone companies, one of the reasons we merged or acquired them is because they had a great brand. And that added to our portfolio. Wasn't necessarily just filling a hole. It was a fantastic brand, right? And so you have a period of time, sometimes multiple years, where that brand, you want to keep that brand. So they've got their own website, and you keep that website separate. And so now all of a sudden you may have 4 or 5 different websites, and you've got to connect all of those because they're technically still all under your umbrella. So really maximizing all of that website traffic to collect that data. And then, other data elements that are key is, whatever feeds your own scoring model, right? I would say, we do a thing called an RFE, recency, frequency, and experience. So recency, so the time data element, how recent did someone come in? Because if someone had attended one of our key events a month ago, they're more valuable than someone that did that same event 3 years ago. Frequency, how often did you do it over whatever period of time you want to measure? And then what's the experience? If I just downloaded an ungated web paper or a white paper, that's different than if I asked for a free trial, or even more different than I said, contact me. So I think those are other elements. So I'd say those elements, those last 3 there that feed your scoring model, marry that with your website traffic to show intent, marry that with your industry, so that at least I know where I can start that conversation and have the most relevant content for you. Those are some of the must-haves. Then layer on top everything we talked about last with intent data. It just kind of sends it home. It may not be the perfect advice, but what I have found, so I've been SAP 24 years now, and in marketing operations, whether it was global or local in North America, for about the last 10 or 12. And exactly to your point, with all of these new platforms, you can really suffer from shiny object syndrome, right? And you can easily get distracted with, here's the next latest and greatest, be all end all, silver bullet, describe it how you want. And I would say, while they're all absolutely great, there is no one perfect answer. So my recommendation would be is always bump up the conversation to the strategic level to say, really, what am I trying to get accomplished? And pick the technology providers, because there'll be a lot out there, but pick the ones that meet your criteria. And in all honesty, do your due diligence and just ride them out. Don't think that the other shiny object is the right answer, because I think what happens is you can get so much further along in doing a few things well and really doing them well, as long as they're based in sound fundamentals and strategy, which is why I say start from there, as opposed to playing ping pong, and just bouncing around from vendor to vendor to vendor and never really gaining momentum. And I think that's more of a detriment. So, and if anybody has teenage kids, or the term, FOMO, fear of missing out, don't worry. You're probably not missing out. The grass isn't always greener on the other side. Sometimes it is. So do your due diligence. I'm not going to say, stuck in a rut, and if something's not working, Tom said, stick with it because it's going to ride out. Find that balance. But the one thing I would say is, when you get inundated with every other shiny object, is have that, whether it's a list of, here's my criteria of things that help me attain what I want to attain. For us, for example, it was, we didn't have a good sense of what was happening in the market. So we said digital listening, there's new areas and new providers out there. Let's listen to them. And every other one, there may be some different ones, other vendors, but if they're not markedly different, then just invest with that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vendors and get the most out of them, and do that well. Because I think what we find ourselves is we never give the process a chance to do well, because then you get into the whole discipline of change management. You're gonna, have a little bit of a bump because it's new, and then you're gonna go down in productivity because you're changing some processes to a new, better way. Don't make your decision on that, right? That valley of despair. Give yourselves the time to understand, am I going to come up and reap the benefits, or am I just going to stay in that valley? And then it's time to pull the eject cord for sure. So I would say that's my recommendation over the experience I've had is be fundamentally sound in your determination of who you want to use. And then stick with it for a good bit. Don't play ping pong. Don't say, hey, here's the next best one. Let's try that, or let's try that. Because you're always just going to be the lowest common denominator. You're never going to really get to the best practice of whatever that vendor says. Stick with us for a bit, and then you'll get there. So ride it out for a little bit, but have a good discipline behind your decisions. So I think, traditionally marketing ops has been probably focused around your MarTech stack, right? So, and whether it's just the technology getting deployed, making sure the funnel is converting, what are each of your conversion steps from people who are engaged to the people you sent to tele, to your leads, to, follow your funnel, whatever, consulting firms version of a funnel you like to model after. And so marketing ops was probably more tech focused, and certainly within reporting as well. So you marry those two things together, the marketing technology to help you automate your marketing processes and get you more efficient, to then all of a sudden the performance side of the house and the reporting engines. And so I think where I feel it's going is that, sometimes it's a bad thing when, I call it the technology tail wags the dog, but sometimes technology has to be a little bit of, the tip of the spear and leading the strategy. So I see marketing ops morphing into, or at least splitting off and creating its own, but I think morphing into a strategic marketing operations. Because as we talked about maybe at the top of the session, you've got so much data that comes in. Your marketing operations folks, it takes a special breed, of people, I think, that not only know enough of the technology, enough of the weeds, because folks that may know, data can tell you anything you want it to tell you. It takes someone who knows the business, know what your business stakeholders, the questions that they're going to ask, and you figure out that's the next layer. And so you go from just information to the analysis and insights. And I think that's where marketing operations has to go, because technology isn't going to get less, right? It's just going to get so much bigger. And marketers today, whether you're in B2B or B2C, there's so much on their plate, from leveraging the technology to new ways of engagement, to managing your budgets, to maybe managing headcount and personnel. The breadth of scope for marketers today is getting so big that they maybe don't have the ability to be as analytical and insightful as maybe that robo marketer would be, that we would, design the perfect marketer to be. But at the same time, you also can't have folks that are just only reporting jockeys, and if they don't know necessarily the business. I feel that's where marketing ops is going to go, is to really partner with your senior level executives to go together hand in hand, getting that seat at the table, almost being your marketing VP's chief operating officer to a degree, and say, this is how all of the technology makes your people work smarter, work them more efficient. Also, then here's things coming down the road that we're starting to see trends because there's so much available. That kind of, I almost see marketing ops as being the COO and being a little more strategic to your marketing executives and helping steer that ship, just because of so much data is out there. That's got to net it out, and you need operations to turn that data into intelligence. I think that last question was the takeaway. It was, at least from a marketing operations perspective, where the angle that I'm coming from, it's getting more strategic. You're getting to partner more with executives. But in order to do that, let's not, it just doesn't happen by default. You've got to bring your A game, right? You have to have the skills on your team. That's the tough part too. You have to have the skills to be able to analyze the data, understand all the what ifs, know what the next business question is. So I think that's where that's headed. Then the exciting part, as we touched on the top of the call, is with all the different data, and particularly in the digital space, right? Many of your companies out there, your listeners out there, we're right around the corner from the first half being done of 2021. No physical events are in place, right? Some guidance is happening out there, whether people are going back to your office if you used to work in an office. If you used to host in the B2B space, big events, you're going digital on those events now. Then all of a sudden, ungate all of that stuff. Oh my Lord, how do I now show a return on something that's almost fully ungated? But that digital space is the second big thing, I would say. The third big area we really didn't touch on, and we don't have to go into this, a lot though, is if you've heard me mention GDPR, the General Data Protection or Global Data Protection Regulations, primarily for companies operating in the European Union. If you're in a global company, depends on where your data lives, you may be exposed to that. That was the excuse, last year, depending on your audience here. But if you're in the US, to say, oh, that was over there, I can't believe they're hampering us, or we don't need to do that. Guess what? California Consumer Protection Act, CCPA, is on board now. That is probably going to impact your data privacy. Over 37, I think, on last count, states in the United States have legislation pending around data privacy, since we don't have a federal legislation. So when we used to get by as an implicit country, no more. It's no more. So I would say that has been a big part since 2018 when GDPR went into effect, but also in this past year in operations, is the procedures you put in place for data privacy. And I don't mean it to be like, oh, that data privacy. Data is the new currency, right? It's the new fuel. Everything we're talking about, not just what we can do to pursue our commercial endeavors here for pushing our business, but personal data, that PII, personally identifiable information, that's no joke. That is also the new currency. How your companies set up systems to handle that will absolutely go through the roof. And I think, that's maybe another session that we can dedicate some time to. But those are the three big areas, I think. Marketing ops going strategic, so much data, out there that you really need to harness the digital space as more and more engagement goes digital. And then data privacy, it's upon us. So invest some time in that.
We have to. We got to have you back on to talk a little bit more about the data privacy piece, Tom. Getting ahead of it being a massive endeavor.
Because if you're not ahead of it, not to drain the topic on that too much, if you will forever be chasing it, and you do not want to be chasing it. Just look in the headlines. Not going to throw any companies under the bus, but there are verdicts we're maybe a little more sensitive to it because we're a European company. Billions with a B, billions of dollars in fines, and sometimes double-digit billions in fines. Now, certainly that'll be tied up in courts, but you do not want to be tied to the systems that said, hey, that was okay. We can market to them. Don't worry about it.
Right.
Get your systems in place. It's a lot of work, and you may not be the nice guy. You may not be the friendly guy, because some people will think it's sales prevention or marketing prevention, but it's a worthy target. And taking the sarcasm and joking aside, data privacy is absolutely deadly serious from a personal perspective, and it's almost, isn't it about time? When you think about it, take a step out of all of our corporate roles, and we have our own personal data, whether it's on any of our social networks. We're trying to be protective of that as well. It's no different, right? So it's really trying to be respectful of that. And in all honesty, wrapping that up, is if you're in the B2B space, even if it's B2B or B2C, it's about relationships and engagements. And if you're honest and authentic is a term you'll hear, and I think in how I treat your data, or how all of a sudden I'm not getting a cold call and it's curious how you got my information, you're not going to cement that relationship, right? So that goes out the window. So it'll eventually feed the authenticness of yourself and the relationship building. If you treat someone's data with the reverence really that it feeds into it. It's a little bit of a bumpy road here going in it, and every state is looking different, but it will feed the whole cycle eventually.